The game designers at CD Projekt Red have programmed major ray tracing lighting effects in their latest blockbuster, Cyberpunk 2077. And like many AAA titles that came before it, playing this game at max settings requires some big kid components. Thankfully, we had some on hand here at the studio, where we built a system almost entirely out of parts from Gigabyte. For this build, we have an Intel Core i9-10900K socketed into an Aorus Z490 Ultra motherboard. In the DIMM slots, 16 gigabytes of Aorus desktop RAM, with RGB of course, for the performance boost. For the storage drive, a Gigabyte 2.5-inch SATA 3 SSD. We aren't overclocking, but we have an Aorus RGB liquid cooler with a 280mm radiator for good measure. The case we're using is a C200 glass ATX gaming case. And now, the pièce de résistance, an Aorus GeForce RTX 3080 Master 10G graphics card. When we said big kid components, we weren't kidding. This video card has some serious girth. It takes up 4 PCIe slots with an extended heatsink and a 3-fan design. There are customizable RGB appointments and an LCD screen that displays GPU temperature or custom text and images of your choosing. It's significantly larger than the Founders Edition 3080 we used in the previous RTX Theater video, and look how it dwarfs Gigabyte's 2080 Super. We downloaded the RGB Fusion 2.0 software to give our Gigabyte build the look we wanted, and then set out to capture ray-traced goodies around Night City. Naturally, we have the graphics settings all the way up. At first, the ray-traced lighting effects might seem trivial, but with a little mindfulness, you start to see places where different sources of light bounce off one another just like they do in real life. Check out the glare from the wet street at the night market. Pretty sweet with the effects off. Turn on ray tracing and you get even more detail. You see the fluorescent lights shining from the storefronts cast onto the ground, and the reflections of passersby in the puddles. Here's another dark scene. Notice at the end of the hall there are 3 lights in a row. Ray tracing is off, and there's a generic-looking reflection on the floor. Turn on ray tracing, now that reflection mimics what you would see in real life. 3 different sources of light in the ground glare. Same part of the map in Chinatown, ray tracing off. And now on. Watch the reflection of the orange sign pop. Pretty soon, you'll start seeing these effects everywhere you turn. Here, NCPD is documenting a crime scene. There are multiple sources of light shining onto the dead Chumbas. Turn RTX on, and look at the detail that is added. Something as banal as this trash pile gets a glow up when you turn on the RTX. Look how it adds shadowing and depth to those bags. You can almost smell that scene. Now, in daylight, ray tracing off, look how you can see the glow of the vending machines in the windows. Turning on RTX adds a ton more detail, and objects move inside the reflection. For whatever reason, it's always wet in Night City. I suppose that's good news if you're into RTX. Here, with it on, you can see the colors of the tall buildings reflected on the ground. Watch what happens when you turn off the effects. You lose the sense of the buildings towering overhead. Subtle? Sure. But when you add it up, the lighting effects create an immersive feel for the gameplay. When looking for ray-traced lighting effects in Cyberpunk, you start to pay attention to the interplay of different lighting sources here in real life. It's impressive how game designers are able to harness the power of AI to recreate how your eyes and brain process stimulus into the reality that you perceive. That's a trip in and of itself. Of course, lighting effects are a relatively small portion of the overall gameplay. Frame rates are a huge factor, and these effects require a ton of GPU power when we have them at max settings. And that's what DLSS 2.0 is for. Short for Deep Learning Super Sampling, DLSS is an AI-powered mechanism that NVIDIA graphics cards use for scaling up game resolution. DLSS-enabled games offer users a range of settings to help balance realistic lighting effects with your desired smoothness of gameplay. How this works is, your PC renders images at a lower resolution initially, and then, with the help of DLSS, increases the resolution to match the native dimensions of your screen. For example, say you want to play games on a 1440p monitor. DLSS does some of the processing for you with the help of NVIDIA's supercomputers pushing some of your pixels. In short, your system assumes a 1080p workload while you play on a 1440p image. Let's see what this looks like using a GeForce RTX 3080 with ray tracing at Ultra and cycling through the DLSS settings. Here's a challenging scene with lots of lighting effects. We have a 1440p monitor using the NVIDIA GeForce Experience tool for capturing the scenes. With DLSS at auto, our FPS sits right around 67 or 68 FPS. Pretty smooth. If you want, you can sacrifice a few frames for more ray tracing effects by moving DLSS to quality. Here's how that looks, and we're hovering right around 60 FPS for this scene. During the scenes where extra frames come in handy, like for fast-paced driving around Night City in a car that's on fire, that's when you can lean on DLSS a little more. Moving DLSS to performance, the cityscapes fly by noticeably smoother. We're seeing frames well into the 80s for these scenes, still with plenty of lighting effects retained. Playing through what is arguably the most ambitious video game ever created, it's hard to complain about how the game looks and feels with the equipment we have at our disposal. As for the graphics card shortage, that's a different story. We hear you, and we're doing our best to get more of these cards into your hands. Check out the links below to learn more about the Gigabyte components we used for this build, and to enter Newegg Shuffle for a chance to buy NVIDIA 30 series graphics cards.